A function is a block of statements that is written to achieve a particular task. It supports modularity and enables code reusability. Let's see how we can write a function in Python. In Python, we can directly define a function using the def keyword. So first we type def, which is a keyword for defining a function. We give a space and then we write the name of the function. The name of the function has to be a valid identifier. You can go back to one of my previous videos if you want to see the rules that are to be followed in order to write identifiers. Now we have to come up with a name of a function. Let's say I give the name as my function, and that has to be followed by the name of the function. As you can see, is my function here is followed by a pair of parentheses. This pair of parentheses denotes that this name, my function, is a Python function, is a Python user-defined function. Mind you, we are writing user-defined functions here. Okay, so you have a pair of parentheses. Now we have to start the block, the function block. So you give a colon, you press enter, and you move to the next line. And now you need to indent the block. So how many spaces do we use for indentation? We use 4 spaces. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 spaces, 4 white spaces for indentation. And now we can write our function. We can write the block of statements inside our function. So the first example that I'll be taking is a simple one where I'll be taking no arguments. As you can see, it is denoted by the empty pair of parentheses. I'll simply print a message. So I'll say print and I'll say hello friend. Okay, so I'll say hello friend and that's it. I'll give the closing parentheses and end of my function. As you can see, I have been taken to the beginning of the new line, and what I'll do is I'll now write a statement to call my function. So what we saw here in these 2 lines of code was the function definition. Now we have to somehow write a statement to call this function. So how do we call the function? In order to call the function, just like in other programming languages, we need to write the name of the function. So the name of my function is my function, and we have to see if the function is accepting any arguments. As you can see, the function that I have defined does not accept any arguments as denoted by the empty pair of parentheses. So when we call the function, our list of arguments will also remain empty. And now what we can do is, now we can simply execute this program. That's it. There's nothing else that needs to be done. You simply write the function. If you observe, this function, which consists of a single line of code, does not return any value either. Now, since it does not return any value, there is no requirement of a variable on the left hand side of the function call. So the part that I've highlighted is the function call. Now I don't need any variable on the left hand side of the function call. The reason being, this function is not returning any value. There is no return statement inside the function body. Now let's try to run this. So I'll just save this file. I'll go to my command prompt and I'll execute this. So I'll say Python and I'll write, say, demo function.py. If I execute this, I suppose that's not the name of the file. Just check it out. Yeah, so the name of the file is func_demo. Sorry about that. So the name of the file is func_demo. So func_demo.py. And if I run this, you can see that I'm getting the expected output, right? So this was the first example on the use of functions, a function which is not accepting any argument and it is simply printing a message. Now let's try to work on this. Okay, let's try to modify this function. Let's say this function now decides to take in 2 arguments. So if it decides to take in, so I'll just erase this part. Okay, I'll just erase all this and I'll go back. Now let's say my function takes in 2 arguments. Now, as you know, variable names in Python do not have a data type, right? Python is a weakly typed programming language, and we do not need to specify the data type as we would have to in other programming languages when we are writing the list of arguments. So whatever we write within this pair of parentheses will be the function signature. What is the function signature? The list of parameters, the inputs to the function, right? The list of parameters that act as inputs to the function. Now here in Python, as compared to other programming languages, we do not need to write the data type. We simply need to write the name of the variables. Again, the name of the variable must simply be a legal identifier. I want my function to accept two arguments. So what I'll say is I'll just write two parameters, two legal parameter names. Let me call them var1 and var2. Now what I'll do is I'll just go to the next line. Again, I'll indent 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 spaces. I'll simply return the sum. Okay. Or let me just go step by step. Let me just add the sum. So the sum is what? var1 plus var2. So I can say sum, I can say s is equal to var1 plus var2. Fairly simple program. I hit enter, go to the next line. Again, I need to indent because I want to print this sum. So I can say 1, 2, 3, 4. I can say print, and I can say s, or I can make it even better. I can say that the sum is s, right? Now if I hit enter, and let's say I'm done with my function. So now my function contains two lines of code. Again, it's not returning any value. So when I call this function, all I need to specify is the function name and the list of arguments, right? The input to the function. So let's say I say 4 comma 5. What will happen now? The function will get called with the arguments 4 and 5. Now there'll be a corresponding copy operation. So 4 will be given to this first parameter var1, and 5, which is my second argument, will be given to the second parameter of the function, that is var2, right? And now as you can see, a sum is being calculated and stored in s, and the sum is being printed. So let's try to run this. Let's see what we get as the output. And as expected, we get the sum as 9, which is indeed the sum of 4 and 5. So we get the correct answer. Now this, of course, this function which I've written, it can be improved. Instead of having this variable summing up the values of var1 and var2, I can simply get rid of this line. And what I can say is the sum is, I can directly do it, right? Instead of using that extra variable, I can directly do this. So let me just save this and show it to you. Let us be absolutely sure that this is possible. And yes, it is. The sum is indeed 9. So once again, it works. Okay. Now, so we are done with the functions having no arguments and also functions having arguments. In both cases, we did not return any value, right? We only decided to print the value. Let's see an example where we have to return this value. Let's say I want to define a function which will take in two arguments. Let's say it's 4 and 5. And okay, I'll just erase this. I'll start fresh. So we want a function which will again take in two arguments or two parameters denoted by var1 and var2, and it will simply calculate the product and it will return the product. So how do we go about it? So let's say we have a variable called p for storing the product, and we can say var1 times var2, var1 star var2. And now the second line, again, it has to be indented using 4 white spaces. We'll have a return statement. And what are we returning? We're returning the value of p, which is the product of var1 and var2. So I'll say return p. I'll hit enter. I'm done with the function. So I'll be going again to the beginning of the line, right? Whatever statements I write using one level of indentation, as you can see here, as highlighted. So I'm using one level of indentation to write these two statements. So these two statements are part of the function. If I have to come out of the function body, I simply have to go to the beginning of the line. That is what I'm doing here. I am now at the beginning of the line and I want to call this function. So I'll simply write the name of the function and let's say pass in two values. Let's say again 4 comma 5. Now the interesting thing is, like in the previous case we saw when we were printing the sum, the value 4 is copied to var1 and the value 5 is copied to var2. But the difference in this case is there is a return statement now. Now, since the function is returning a value, when I'm calling the function, there has to be a variable on the left-hand side of the function call, which will be able to hold the return value coming from the function. So I need to have something like this, let's say I have a variable called result, and I say result equal to my function. Now, whatever value is returned from this function called my function, that will be stored in the variable result. Why? Because it is present on the left hand side of the function call. So always remember, whenever a function returns a value, that value has to be stored in a variable in the function call. That value has to be associated with a variable in the function call, and that variable should be present on the left hand side of the function call. Right? Now let's try to run this. So the expected answer is how much? 4 into 5, 20. Let's see if it works. So if we run this, I think I missed the print statement. Yeah, if I'm not missing, yeah, I missed the print statement. So after calculating the result, if I have to view the result, I need to print it, right? So I should say the product is, let's say, result. And I save this. If I try to run this again, yeah, the product indeed is 20. So it's working. So far, so good. Now this program, of course, as you can understand, it can be improved like we saw earlier. So instead of having a variable to store the product, we can directly return the product, right? So we can directly say, so I think I've just messed up the indentation. Just give me a moment. I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 white spaces. I can simply say var1 times var2. Note one thing, the pair of parentheses for return statement is optional. Just like you have in other programming languages, it is optional to enclose the return value within parentheses. So I can do away with this, right? I'm using just one operator, so there is no question of collision, or there is no question of one expression being evaluated before another, or one operator being, you know, having higher precedence over another. So there is no need to have a pair of parentheses. So I'll simply have return var1 into var2. And even when I'm calling the function, I can have an improvement there as well. So instead of storing the value inside a variable, what I can do is I can directly have this function call that you see here, my function 4, 5, I can directly have this in the return statement, isn't it? I can do this. This is this is seen in other programming languages as well, right? Where we can have the function call being substituted at any place where a value is required. So when I'm using the print statement and I'm separating these two arguments, right? I'm passing two arguments to the print. See, print is a function. Print is not a statement. Pardon me. Print is a function, and I'm passing two arguments to it. The first is a string called the product is, and the second is a function call. Now, what will print do? It will simply output. Now, if I'm making a function invocation inside a print function, so I'm inside the print function right now, and I've made a function invocation of my function. I can do this only if my function call is supposed to return a value, which is the case here. It is returning a value, so I can do this. So if I save this, you will see that I've got the same answer. There you have it. The product is 20. Okay, so it's working. Now, since this screen is getting a bit cluttered, I'll just clear my screen. Give me a moment. I think CLS would work. Yeah, CLS works. And let's go back. So that was about returning values, right? So we have returned the product. So we have seen a few variations. Let me show you another interesting feature. There is a concept of default arguments. So if you remember, comments in Python, single line comments can be written using a hash symbol. So we can have default arguments, not arguments, sorry about that. We can have default arguments in Python. So what are default arguments? Let's try to understand. Let's say in the print function, or let's say in the function that I've defined here, my function, let's say I do var2 equal to 5. Whenever I'm assigning a value to a parameter in the function definition, please note this. If you are assigning a value to a function parameter in the function definition, then that parameter becomes a default argument. So I've assigned a value of 5 to var2, which means that var2 from now onwards is a default argument. Now what does its significance is? What is its significance? What is the significance of var2 now becoming a default argument? Let's try to understand. Let me write another print statement. So the first one is the conventional one, right? Let me have something like this. Let's say something like 10. Okay, right. And let me just change this to 3. So just pause the video here for a moment and think, or just try to guess what the output would be in 2 cases. Okay, I guess you've given it a thought. Now, the first case, the first print function that you see here, the part that I've highlighted, is what we saw in the previous case as well, right? The only difference is I've passed 3 instead of 5, but the result will be the same. Now, what about this default value? What about this default argument that I just spoke about? See, this default argument will take precedence or will come into the picture only if we do not supply a second argument in the function call. So this is my function call. My function is being called here, as you can see, as highlighted, and it is being called using 2 arguments. Whenever I'm passing all the arguments, then the default value is overwritten. The default value is overwritten. Now, var2 will get a value of 3 and var1, like always, gets a value of 4. But look at the second case. In the second case, I'm passing only one value. When I'm passing only one value, it denotes that 10 will be given to var1. 10 will be given to var1, and var2, since I'm not passing a second argument and var2 is my second parameter, it will get the default value. It will get the default value of 5. So what will be the output? I have 2 print statements. The first print statement will produce a value of 12, and the second print statement will produce, why 12? Because 4 into 3 is 12. That's why 12. And the second print statement will produce an output of 10 into this default parameter, which is 5. So what is 10 into 5? 50. Let's verify it. So if we try to execute this, as you can see, the product is 12 and the product is 50. One important thing that you would like to note about default arguments is default arguments must be trailing arguments. That means if I decide to have something like this, let's say var1 equal to 5 and var2 is nothing. If I save this, now let me try to run this. So if I run this, as you can see, yeah, there you have it. Syntax error. Non-default argument follows default argument. This means that your default arguments must be the trailing arguments. That means they must be present at the end of the function definition header. So var1, if it has to be a default argument, then I cannot place it at a position where it is followed by other non-default arguments. Yes, if even var2 becomes a default argument, then it's fine. See, now it will work. Now it will work. I have 2 default arguments. See, now it works. No issues there. But it cannot be that I have a default argument which is followed by a non-default argument. That is not allowed. So all your default arguments must be your trailing arguments. Okay. Default arguments are widely used and they have quite a few features to be implemented. Okay, quite a few features that come into good practice when we are writing programs. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any doubts, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Do like this video and subscribe to our channel. I hope you found this video useful and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.